So it's officially less than a week from the air date of the first episode of Boys Planet, and as an avid watcher of these survival shows, I thought I'd give my thoughts and talk about some interesting theories. If you don't know what Boys Planet is, it's basically a K-pop survival show where 95 trainees will compete to debut in a K-pop group. Of these 95 boys, 47 of them are Korean contestants, and the rest of the 48 are global contestants, which can be foreigners from any country. So K-group and G-group each represent a planet coming together to form one in reference to these two groups forming a K-pop group. I'm not going to go over the specifics, but if you want to know more about the show, I'll put a link down in the description so that you can read more about it. The first thing I want to talk about is the differences between Boys Planet and Girls Planet. I feel like they're promoting Boys Planet a lot more than they promoted Girls Planet. Just all the pre-release content they have for Boys Planet is very insane.
Yeah, young and rich, tall and handsome. I'm Charisma Boss, Baby Ricky.
Nice.
For Girls Planet, they literally did not even leave us a crumb until the episode actually aired. They even had this event where fans could meet them in person before the release of the first episode. I feel like Mnet finally caught on to the power of meme marketing because all of their challenges and clips they have been releasing over the past few weeks are very TikTok friendly, and they're presented in a way that's very up with current social media trends. Okay, so let's talk about the performance video. I really like the Girls Planet one because they seemed very intentional with all the clips they were putting in together to create some sort of story. But the Boys Planet one just seemed like a bunch of stock videos mashed together, and I can't even really tell what the story is about. Also, if we compare the performance transitions, Girls Planet was literally giving I'm ascending into space, I've fireworks budget level videography. But the Boys Planet one, the dance break is very underwhelming. There's no huge transition. So overall, I feel like the Girls Planet performance video had a much higher budget than the Boys Planet video. Now let's go on to the ranking system. So in Girls Planet, there was the 3-cell ranking system. This show focused heavily on the Korean contestants, the Japanese contestants, and the Chinese contestants. Each cell had a member from each group. And in the very beginning of the show, the way you would get eliminated is if your group does not do well, then the entire group would be eliminated. And there was a lot of heat for this because it's obviously not fair if one person in the group does really well but the other contestants do not, and they drag them down to get eliminated. So right now there's a lot of information floating around about the first round, but what we know for sure is that first round will consist of several different K groups and several different G groups. You might think, well, this is actually an advantage because the K group people can easily communicate with each other in the same language, so can the G group people. That cuts out having to translate between a bunch of different languages. But actually this isn't the case because if you're a G group member, you can be from anywhere. There's still so many language barriers within G group. At least on the other shows, even if everything was mixed, the K group member could also speak Japanese or Chinese, and they would kind of hold the group together and act as kind of like a translator. But now all of the G group members are just fending for themselves. And we know how Mnet doesn't give anyone translators on this show.
Good luck with that.
So basically, K group has the huge advantage because at least they can all communicate to each other in the same language. So according to Reddit, someone said that in one of the first voting rounds, they had separate voting devices for voting for G group members. Seems kind of sus. We know Mnet has a history with rigging. I'm not sure they'll do anything super bold, but I can't say they won't resort to cheap tactics to try to boost K group. Again, I feel like they'll eventually get rid of this K and G group system, just like how they did with Girls Planet, but by the time they get rid of this system, they would have already weeded out a lot of the G group members, which was probably intentional on Mnet's part.
That's great.
So before I move on to one of the main theories I'm going to talk about today, I think I need to establish one of the most important factors for being a successful contestant on these survival shows: screen time. Obviously, the more screen time you have, the more chances you have to win the audience's hearts over, and that translates to more votes. Of course, there's always exceptions to this logic, but that doesn't disregard the fact that most of the members from these survival shows who debut typically have the most screen time. But how does one get said screen time? Well, you can do this by filling in some kind of archetype, which leads me to the one theory I'll be talking about today, the archetypes theory. Credit goes to Reddit poster TC for coming up with this theory, but I will also be explaining and giving some of my commentary on this as well. As much as we love the realness of reality TV, it's not news that shows like this recognize that there needs to be some sort of drama to spice up the plot. And while some interactions on these shows are genuine, the situations that cause these reactions can easily be created to give a certain dramatic result. For example, let's think about a vlog. Let's say I decided to film an ordinary day with my imaginary friends and I caught them messing around in a playful way. With a few cuts, sound effects, and music, I can easily turn this playful scene into a juicy, dramatic friendship breakup story. In the same way, shows like Mnet are notorious for adding in, cutting out, and editing various clips to create some sort of story. Or else the show would just be a bunch of performance videos. One way to create these interesting plot lines is to introduce a colorful cast of characters that the audience can easily relate to and follow. But before I go straight into the archetypes, the Reddit poster does set aside a whole section to talk about how trainees can boost their chances of winning the editor god's favor to fit into these archetypes. The very first thing is visuals. Obviously, you need to sprinkle in some eye candy throughout the show to keep the viewers interested. One example is from Produce X 101, Kim Mingyu. Right when he walked in, everyone's eyes were on him. Even the judges made some kind of comment that, oh, his face looks really good on camera. So obviously, these types of people will always have some sort of upper hand advantage, because the better they look on camera, the more camera time they'll have. This season's visual seems to be Chiwoong. The next thing I want to talk about is agency. If you're in one of the big three or in any other established company, you're more likely to gain the viewer's interest. This is the equivalent of having a Harvard degree or saying you worked at Google or Apple. Next, I want to talk about nationality. This show was heavily marketed to produce a widely international global group with people of various nationalities and ethnicities. But rather than being a plus, sometimes I think being a foreigner is actually a huge disadvantage. It's pretty obvious how domestic voters tend to lean more towards voting for K-group members rather than global contestants. Whether it be for political reasons or to contribute to the more homogenous mindset. Sometimes the foreigner card does work, but I feel like that's only for exceptional cases, like if you're a Korean Canadian, Korean American, or Korean Australian. We've seen this become more common in the industry because they attract global audiences while still sticking true to their Korean heritage. For example, we have Mark Lee from NCT, Danielle from New Jeans, Pangchan and Felix from Stray Kids, and Jake from ENHYPEN. The next thing I want to talk about is industry experience. There's always a handful of trainees on these survival shows who have either debuted and been unsuccessful and eventually disbanded, or they're currently part of an active group. Many of these trainees who've debuted before really do understand what it's like to be behind a camera, and they know how best to capture the audience's attention through variety form content. For example, maybe they know their best angles on camera, they can make up witty responses to questions, or maybe they know how to stir up some petty, non-cancelable drama just to give themselves a plot line on the show. This allows them to create moments that are basically meme gold, or help them easily position themselves into an archetype that can therefore get them more screen time. Now that I've explained all these factors, let's go deeper into the archetypes. The first one is the hero or the heroine. This is a trainee who has a lot of potential but isn't really quite there yet. For example, Taeyeon from Girls Planet, she was number 1 in K-group in the initial evaluation, but she started started falling off and eventually she lost her first place spot. The editors gave her a lot of screen time to show her growth throughout the show, and the whole show just seemed to be about her getting her redemption to prove that she did deserve that initial first place evaluation. It got really obvious that Mnet was pushing her when they showed her visiting her parents' house, and also they all visited her family restaurant. Then we have the leader archetype. This is basically the knight in shining armor who rushes in to help a very unlikely group of weak contestants, or just someone who steps up to solve problems in some heated moments. Again, I want to go back to Taeyeon. In the ice cream team, Taeyeon really showcased her leadership skills, and she really brought out the best in some contestants who were otherwise thought to be very weak in terms of skill and ability. A lot of netizens did comment on her ability to give everyone equal time to shine in the whole choreography, and also just how well put together the performance was overall.
Pop-up queen.
There was also the instance where in the snake performance group, they originally had someone else as the leader, but because they were having problems, they asked Taeyeon to step up as leader and be in charge of handling the choreography and leading the group. Next, we have the failed idol. I did change this a little bit from the original Reddit posters, but this is a contestant who somehow got roped into the show and typically has a strong background in something else like acting, modeling, some sport, or maybe they're just really attractive. But they really fall behind in terms of singing, rapping, or dancing abilities compared to the other contestants. I just want to distinguish that there's always a handful of these types on every survival show, but there's always one that gets more attention than the rest because of a few different factors. Maybe it's their determination or effort, which triggers the underdog effect and makes the audience really want to root for and follow this individual contestant. Or maybe it's just how much they grow on the show, because we all know that everyone's a sucker for some character development. Another characteristic that these archetypes typically have is they're either endearing, charismatic, likable, or cute. I would say the person who really birthed this archetype was Sohye from the first season of Produce 101. Basically, Sohye intended to become an actress, but her agency kind of threw her onto the show. Her skills were very underdeveloped compared to the other contestants, but people really wanted to see her succeed. She was given a lot of screen time because these were her chances to redeem herself, to prove that she deserves to be on the show, and that really struck a chord with the audience members. And then there are a few others who kind of branched off from Sohye in their own unique way. Kim Min-gyu, he also didn't really have a lot of experience as a trainee, but he was praised for his visuals, and even though he wasn't as skilled as other contestants, people really loved to see him go from the bottom to the very top. But unfortunately, he did not debut either. I feel like this archetype really feels the anybody can succeed if you work hard, because this is a message that resonates with all of us. This show is all about people trying to achieve their dreams. And in some shape or form, I feel like it's supposed to speak to us and inspire us to achieve our dreams too. So in my opinion, this archetype definitely has the most support from audience members, and typically, if you're in this archetype, you're almost guaranteed a spot. Next, we have the Wonder Kid. This is definitely a wild card kid contestant who's really talented but is overshadowed by all of the other contestants just because they're way younger than everybody else. A really good example is Ihan from Produce 48. In my opinion, she was one of the most well-rounded contestants, and she did grab people's attention in the beginning because people associated her with Chungha because they're from the same agency. But unfortunately, people forgot about her because that's just what happens with this archetype. I think it's pretty cruel because I feel like most companies who send such young contestants onto the show probably know that they have the least chance of making it. Of course, the exception is Chang Won-young, but I don't know. Maybe it's because they just send these people out for more experience. and they can afford to be on these shows multiple times because they're so young. But who knows? Maybe each time they go on the show, their recognition and popularity will slowly snowball into a debut contract. But I hope this at least opens a lot of doors for them if they don't debut. Next, we have the one true main vocal archetype. I don't really have to explain this in depth that much, but this is basically someone who just has insane vocal abilities. On Girls Planet, this was Kim Chaeyeon. Usually with this archetype, they have multiple of these main vocal characters, but it really fuels the competitive side of the show because they all have to be pit against each other to compete for that #1 vocal spot. And this whole thing in itself creates a lot of subplots in the main overall story. And we can't forget that these rivalries are our main source of voice crack content.
I'm in my flop era. Oh, it's just not giving.
Last, but definitely not least, is the desperate idol. An active idol who's a part of a group that's struggling to make ends meet? Or are they an ex-idol from a long-forgotten group? Maybe they're an ex-trainee from the big three who's never had their dreams fully realized. Whatever the case is, they've all had their taste of stardom, but it didn't take long for that savory bite to slip through the cracks. Mnet likes to play the pity card, and they love to make contestants say the magic words, "This is my last chance." But hey, who doesn't love a good sob story? Another smaller archetype that I want to mention is the villain. This wasn't in the Reddit post, and it's also definitely not an archetype that ensures that you get a spot in the top 10, but I feel like it's worth mentioning because there's always this character who is problematic or stirs up the plot, and Mnet really loves to fan the flames and blow this up because they need more drama. This in turn causes the fans to unite and leave a bunch of nasty comments. And I feel like a good example is from Girls Planet, Fu Yaning. Her whole situation with throwing shade at Eugene was really blown out of proportion, and you can see later on that they actually became really good friends on the show. So we know that this was probably just blown up by Mnet. As you can see, this show is a lot like a metaverse because there are so many archetypes that branch off from the main plot line, and the audience just eats up these subplots. I did leave out a few parts of this series, but if you want to check it out, I'll leave it down in the description below because it's actually really well thought out and written. Now going on to my final thoughts. Seeing how Kepler turned out, I can't really see whatever group this show produces becoming a big hit, no pun intended, especially since boy groups haven't been doing that well recently. I saw this one TikTok that said that they missed when Mnet used to rig these survival shows because at least Mnet had the vision to create a well-balanced group whenever they did tip the scales, which makes a lot of sense seeing the way Kepler turned out. No hate on Kepler, I still love all of them. In my opinion, every survival show kind of fell off after Produce 48. But even if this group that debuts with Boys Planet does flop, that doesn't mean it's entirely the end for them. As we've seen with other seasons, a lot of these contestants and a lot of the people that do end up debuting do have a lot of other doors open for them. Alternatively, I could see this year being a new era for boy groups because they no longer have to compete with BTS. Because this 2-year hiatus is the only chance that any boy group has to make a name for themselves, since there's a huge vacuum in the army. And since at this point we're pretty much all conditioned to constantly consume content, we need our new shiny bright toy to keep us occupied until BTS comes back. And who knows, maybe this show will grab everyone's interest and lead K-pop into an era of new boy group powerhouses. Let's just sit back, relax, and watch the drama unfold. So who are your top picks for Boys Planet? What other theories do you have? Feel free to mention them in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Okay, finish!